Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the FinStep Asia Fintech Decoded podcast. We are back talking about some very interesting elements that define the core and fundamentals of technology, in particular in financial services. With me is my co-host Monica Jasuja and our guest for today, Srinivasan Ramamurthy, who is the CEO of Srishta. I will now hand over to Monica to take the intro in, and then we will start talking with Srini on this interesting conversation, talking about quality, talking about testing, and talking about what really is the fundamentals of technology integration in today's financial services. Monica, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bashir. It's a pleasure to have Srini with us online talking about this topic. We've lived, breathed through it. And I kind of reflect back on my time as a product leader where this used to be the major worry that we always had, which is, are we testing it right? And are we making sure that the end product meets the objectives, not just from what we want the customers to have, but is it quality tested to be able to scale to millions, billions of customers? And today we actually have the pleasure of hosting Srini on this conversation, talking about this very exact subject, but kind of breaking it down for our audience to understand why quality and especially what is that basic glue that keeps the development and the product to work so well together that the quality product that comes out of it can be managed. And I think that QA does that part of the job, but it often goes uncelebrated. So let's talk about all these pressures that happen behind the scenes when that amazing product feature that we've thought about is converted into code. And then that code has to make it through to production. But before that happens, we have a lot of things which are happening in the background. So, Srini, welcome. We'd love to, of course, we've been having
Thank
this
you.
conversation for a
Thank
while.
you for having
It's
me.
it's amazing to have you and talk about things that people don't talk about, but they happen silently in the background. And I was intrigued when I heard about what you mentioned when we were having a small chat, which is about being time right and taking pride in what that means. I remember back in my times at a very large payments company, we had a very minor incident on a UI change. And you won't believe what happened. It actually caused such a major failure that for our partner, we actually had the executives on our product team join us over a call with QA, trying to identify not just the root cause, but to make sure that that problem was solved in real time because the fix had to be rolled out to production. Imagine the crisis that that had created. So when you say first time right, it must give a lot of confidence to executives. But what does it really mean? Help us unpack this for our audience.
So instead of, before you get into know what does it mean, why is first time right important? I mean, you have this analyst organization, the Gartner Standards, they publish reports year on year in terms of the efficacy of project implementations, right? And which stands out is that only 30% of the project implementations are delivered within time and budget. 70% of them undergo an overrun of anywhere between 90 to 200%. Those are the statistics that are there. Now, we operate in the banking financial services area. And I think the spend on software development in this area is to the order of about, say, $500 billion a year. And imagine out of that, only $150 billion worth are delivered within time and budget. Right? The rest out of the balance, $350 billion, at least $150 billion are overspent. Now, when you look at the root cause, they say the root cause is, 65% of the root cause is attributed to requirements. You start any software project with a set of requirements saying, what do I want from this application that I'm creating or buying, right? Now, those requirements in our experience, more often than not, are incomplete and not inaccurate. In the sense, process A and B specified, but C and D is implied. Simple. I mean, Mushri would agree with me on this from a treasury point of view. You have something called the concept of a value date, the date on which the deal is done. So let's say I have an HNI customer to whom I am trying to sell him a bond with an yield of, let's say, 2.63%. That bond series got over 3 days ago, and new bond series is available at 2.55%. Now, the bond ticket sizes would be large. Now, he's a high net worth customer. I want him to offer the 2.63 deal. I tell him, don't worry, put in 100 million on this bond today. I will offer you 2.63, which means my system should enable backdating my transaction. The value date should be backdated. Now, when a user says, I want value date to be backdated, and he or she leaves the requirement at that, what does it impact? What does it actually mean is that when you backdate that value date, my yield calculation should also be backdated. That gets missed out. So you have a system which allows you to backdate the transaction, but when the yield calculation happens, it calculates as on that day. Or it will throw out an error saying that the parameter, you are currently at 2.55, not at 2.63. You would have entered saying 2.63. It will either ignore and calculate at 2.55, which means your customer will be mad because he or she's got less yield. Or it will throw out, reject the transaction itself. In either case, you risk losing revenue, you risk losing the customer, right? So that is where, but so therefore, first time right is to that extent important. And secondly, what do you mean by first time right is every aspect of the implementation should work first time right on day one. Typically, go live is a huge event, at least in banks, right? People don't go home for 2 days, 3 days together. There is a war room continuously monitoring whether all transactions are happening right, any issues coming up, right? It could be regulatory issues, it could be customer related issues and things like that. So when you say all transactions, which means a customer who's come into the system, the transaction should be done properly. The transaction could get recorded into the downstream system, whether that happens, and whether the accounting entries happen properly, and finally, whether your MIS gets generated properly. It is not about that system which you're implementing. Your first time right means all my transactions within that system and the way those transactions are to be recorded in my MIS, in my profit and loss, and whether everything from end to end works first time right. That is what first time right means.
And that's also quite important, right? In the sense, a lot of times people think you have a UAT timeline, you have other timelines, but once you're going live, it's impacting your customers, it's a reputational conversation, and there's a lot of pressure on both ends, right? Because one, the bank in itself, or the financial institution here, is very keen to get things done well and wants to go first time right, as you said. And then it brings in the burden from the testing team and the quality and the IT team to ensure that there are no hiccups. Typically, a lot of these maintenances are done, say, late at night for one of these reasons is so as to not have too much disruption for users and clients as well. So there's a lot of pressure in that sense. So, but there's also pressure to do it at speed. So how do you balance this speed with pressure, as it were, right? Because to do things right, sometimes you mean you need to go a little slow. It's almost like a Formula One car, right? You have to have the speed and you have to ensure that you take care of the pressure to keep going fast in the tight corners. Yeah.
Sure. So, Mushi, there are two aspects to it. One, there is a certain minimum time it is going to take. So,
Yeah.
from a project planning point of view, one needs to take that into account, right? But even within that time, yes, there could be constraints. A lot of unexpected things could happen. So, the core which is there is discipline, or I would say, not more than discipline, is the level of preparedness, right? So, for example, like I say, we are a domain focused QA. Why do you have domain focus? Because when you walk in, you need to know the requirements, and in banking, 85% of the requirements are common globally. So when you walk in, you need to know, okay, retail banking applications being implemented or treasury is being implemented. These would be the modules, these would be the surround systems. So you have all that ready. So your level of preparedness would determine the efficiency that you can bring into the project. Like you rightly said, everything would be done. The software build is happening. The minute the software comes in for the first round of testing, you would be running 10,000 test cases. Day one, there would be 100 defects. Day two, so by the time day 20, 1,000 defects. Right? Then what do you do at the end of it? I mean, you come to a conclusion saying that, listen, I have to go live, but I have 300 products in my system. I may not be able to go live with 300 products. So the QA team at that point of time should be able to help you prioritize which products are the P1 products which you can take and go live. Right? But where the level of preparedness, it's like what is that? You have that John Wick series. I don't know if you watched that movie. The John Wick number 1, John Wick 2. So the last one was Parabellum or something like that.
Yeah.
right? The parabellum thing is nothing but a military saying. It basically says that the more you sweat in peacetime, less you bleed in war.
Yeah.
If your war preparation is at it's at peak, you're likely to win the war with very, very, very little bloodshed. So from a QA point of view, ideally every project should follow that. But I'm talking about from a QA point of view, we come in with that mindset. You have to go in saying that, boss, I understand the domain very well. I don't want to go in and start learning. The old joke about consulting saying, I've gone to a pharma company, I got the brief, now I run to the bookstore, pick up a book on pharma industry, and then start going back to the customer. No, you can't do that. A lot of money is at stake. Okay, a lot of customer and a lot of business is at stake. So the level of preparedness needs to be high, and the way you approach the kind of what do you call the so for us, the test design phase is very, very critical. The test design has to be done so comprehensively that test execution is de-skilled. You don't need to be during test execution, the only thinking, whatever thinking bandwidth you have, should go towards these kind of things. How do I reprioritize? How do I identify the impact in the quickest possible time? Okay, this particular module is completely gone. Now, how do I reprioritize my QA efforts to say that, okay, these are the impact areas? How do I quickly identify the impact areas if I'm not prepared well? So the level of preparedness determines your ability to bring in that balance between speed and quality, right? So you are, yes, for example, I'll give another good example of this. We used to be working with a client and where we collected, they have a quarterly release. It is an ongoing kind of this thing, releases, quarterly releases. They are into card processing. So every quarter they send out releases to all their customers who are on the processing platform. Now we tracked each of these releases and we identified for each of the releases, what are the functionalities that typically fail, right? And at the end of 6 releases, we had enough data to do an analysis saying that every time you do a release, this is the probability of failure and even before when we started testing in the first day, you identified what are the critical functions and what are the non-critical functions. And you would always track them separately. So over the end of 18 months, we had this data which said that whenever you have a release, the probability of failure of each of these critical functions is at this percent. And the consequence of failure is also there for each of those critical functionality. That score was assigned by the customer. So now we had a risk-based testing approach, very scientific risk-based testing approach, which said that this is the risk coefficient. Tomorrow, when you have a release, these are the functionalities based on the probability of failure and the consequence. If I run this set of tests, you will go live without any critical defects. So it does require a lot of preparatory work. The foundation has to be extremely strong. It's almost like building muscle memory. You practice so many times, it automatically happens to you. So
Really,
but that foundation,
interested.
the prep work has to be, the preparedness has to be so. Yeah.
Really, I'm very interested in knowing. You mentioned about not losing trust, not losing a customer, of course, and not losing revenue. But I have a question. When it comes to working with financial institutions, which are sometimes centuries old institutions, like the ones that you have as customers, you are also dealing with legacy systems. And now with technology moving so fast, and you talked about a risk-based environment. The minute you said risk, the only thing that I could think about in my head was AI. Now you're working with institutions which have legacy systems. You are testing and you are ensuring that applications that are running on top of these legacy systems always get it, obviously, our first time right tested so that millions or billions of customers are not impacted. How do you manage this trade-off slash I would almost think like a mixture of being able to manage legacy systems and being able to work with legacy systems while still creating applications on top of it, which are the ones that are customer facing, whether it is a business or a customer. And how do you balance that mix that is there?
From a QA point of view, legacy or non-legacy doesn't matter much because you're focused only on the functionality. You're focused on the, what do you call, the business process that it contains. So when it comes to functional testing, it doesn't matter much, right? I mean, as long as I know how to operate green screens, from a mainframe point of view, I would be able to test and figure out what is the expected result and see whether that expected result is there in the system. Where it becomes a challenge is this is the good old days of manual testing, right? Automation. It becomes a challenge because most automation tools that are there, the open source ones, they allow you to do only web or mobile. Right. For if you want to do mainframe test automation, then you have to have an emulator. It may or may not work with your open source tool and things like that. A lot of them do not even help you automate desktop applications. And if you walk into the likes of Wall Street, you will see a lot of desktop applications. Right. So therefore, that is where your, so to speak, innovation and all comes in. So we have a test automation platform which allows you to seamlessly automate between mobile, web, desktop, mainframe, API, and everything. Right? You have an inbuilt emulator.
Yeah.
In that,
Yes.
we have built an inbuilt emulator and things like that. So there is a need for constant innovation in QA.
Absolutely.
It is no longer a
question.
discipline which was very service focused. It is no longer a discipline which was very service focused, saying that, we will come in, we will do functional testing, we have ISTQB certified people. All those things are there. You have domain trained. So, see, your QA is no longer the old functional testing focused on service point of view. In fact, even in the old service testing, when we used to say that we have dedicated business analysts for QA, people would be surprised. Even today, people are surprised, right? And because they have heard QA or BA only in the case of a product development kind of a scenario or in a regular development kind of a scenario. They have never heard of a business analyst in a quality assurance kind of a scenario, right? Whereas for us, that's the most important role because they are the ones who ensure coverage, test coverage, end-to-end kind of a thing. But having said that, I think QA is amenable to be a lot of productization. They need not be like one of the things we have the 6 value systems in our company. One of them is we say that innovation is imperative. That doesn't mean every day we want to see a new Isaac Newton or Thomas Edison kind of a thing. It can be incremental, right? And it can be fairly simple also. Yes, we worked on products. We've delivered 3 products. Those things we have done. But at the same time, for one of our customers, they gave us a parameter dump as a starting point, saying that through this, help me create requirements document. Basically, what they meant was take this dump, convert it into a readable form, recollate it, and then figure out the products that are there in these parameters, talk to my users, write the document, get it signed off. Now, that converting into a readable form takes a lot of effort. Now, we sat down and built an utility. I can bill that effort to the customer. But the fact is, we sat down and built an utility. It's a small innovation. Or building a parameter verification utility, because every test execution you do, 1/3 of the defects are parameter related defects, wrong setting up of the configuration elements. Now, on day 0 of testing, you can run this parameter verification utility and identify all those defects. It saves you a lot of time. It saves them a lot of time. But at the same time, there are larger innovations that are possible. Like I said, we built a comprehensive test automation platform, which not only seamlessly allows you to do end-to-end transaction automation. So it will start with your mobile front end, it will come to your web, it will do API, it will go to your mainframe backend. If there is any desktop application, it will go there and help you completely execute that scenario seamlessly. And with all this, with no automation capability required, manual tester can do it, right? And then we added a lot of domain features. Post-batch verification testing, we built in a scheduler saying that if your batch runs for 3 hours, it will wait for 3 hours, ping your application, check the outputs and get it tested for you. Test data is a critical element. It automatically generates test data. Now, this is one thing because everybody is talking about test automation. But the other area is we built a point of sale simulator. From a payments point of view, we built a point of sale simulator. Now, most simulators available in the market are standalone. We built one with API so that it could connect to any tool and it can be used for test automation. Now, if you have enough domain knowledge, what it lends to is we built a point of sale simulator for message-based testing. Now, you are changing from MT to MX. Format is changing from ISO 8583 to ISO 20022. We configured ISO 20022 in the same simulator. Right?
So,
So I'm saying innovation is in QA is playing a huge role. It lends very beautifully to productization. It doesn't cost you much to build this product as much as it relies on domain knowledge.
So, Srini, you mentioned about domain knowledge and you also mentioned about innovation. These are typically not the things that we think about when we talk about or even think about the QA side. Now, with all the changes that you are seeing happen in this world with multiple type of applications, layers, and I would also think the fragmentation that is going on within the banking and financial services ecosystem, where there are a lot of service providers and almost what we call people in the middle who are now appearing. How difficult or how easy does this make the work that you are doing? Because there are multiple jump off points and end points that are now being owned by different parties in the ecosystem.
Working, executing the work is easy, Monica. The difficult part is selling it. Because when you, like you said, not many people who, when they are going and pitching in for QA, talk so much about domain. Right. So this was when early December, I think. Early December, I was doing a presentation where they said, we have multiple lines of business. How do you say that you understand all the businesses? So one of the things we had done over the last 4.5, 5 years was we built reusable test case repository. So we walked the customer to 161,000 test cases from retail banking to cards to treasury to trade finance to customer lifecycle management in corporate, customer lifecycle management in retail to Swift to payments to everything. Right? And we showed them on a slide. They said, boss, this looks like made up. So we drilled down further. So we took cards. We showed them 40,000 test cases by function and everything. So they were gobsmacked. But the problem is, I don't know why. Yes, it takes time to build. And there are companies which have been around for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. It can be done. Many people haven't done it. Neither the customers have had patience for it. So now when you go and tell, I understand the entire domain, they initially take a step back. What do you mean by you understand the entire domain? Right? Then you tell them, listen, I have a tool which does all these things. That again is a bit of a shocker because the industry, the way it is structured, the guy who does services does only services. The person who comes with the product is a completely different entity. And that has been a problem in the industry. We ourselves have faced as a group of testers because if the tool doesn't work, the testers would say that there's a problem with the tool. You go back to the tool company, he says these people don't know how to use it. Ask them to join my certification course. Right? So that battle has always been there. And then you will have people who would have taken a call at a senior level saying we are going in for this product en masse. They would have bought 100 licenses. Right? Or they would have picked up an open source where there will be 4 experts within the bank who know everything about that open source. Then you become dependent on that. Right? So where we are coming from is, if you walk into the room with something equivalent of saying that I have created comfort in your life as much as an ATM did for a bank customer, it takes time for them to digest it. And where we found it works is the time when I announce this, and if they are going through a pain, it works very well because they want to see what it is. Right? They want to see what exactly the tool is. And in those cases, it's worked beautifully well. So we acquired our first large customer. The customer is large. The order wasn't large with that for us, but it's one of the top 3 Wall Street banks. They bought our tool. Okay. And they did a due diligence of over a year. First, we gave them licenses to evaluate, to see the tool. They used it for 4 months, 30 of them. Then they said, we will do a formal POC. We got it installed in their environment. We did the POC and gave it to them. And finally, the verdict that we got is it is very well thought out and very powerful. And these people are sitting with 7 other tools, including open source. So now they want to take, where I'm coming from is, they did not anticipate a tool to be out there which solves all the frustrations that people generally have had. So when you go with, because they come in and expect you to sell another tool. They come and expect you to do a greater presentation with lot more rhetoric than the other person on the services. Right? Even in the services, we sometimes face because what is our differentiator? We say that I will deliver certainty of outcomes, which means if I'm doing manual testing and after I do the testing, if a critical defect is leaked into the system, which I ought to have found, I pay you a $2,000 penalty. So that people find it a bit difficult to believe.
But I
So,
have to say this that having everything come under one tool seems like a dream come true because, like I keep saying, the fragmentation that exists in the ecosystem is simply not because banks have not kept pace or financial services providers haven't. There's a lot of complexity that actually arises, whether it's from regulation, whether it is from changing requirements, whether it is changing behavior. So, having this common tool, like you spoke about, that you are able to provide to customers must be a huge value add, not just from the perspective of business, but also in terms of revenue. And I think that's a very important point because you can't get it first time right, but not add to the bottom line. So thank you for actually highlighting that. This is very critical. But before I forget, Mushir, I think you wanted to talk about the regulatory piece, didn't you? When you were hearing the complexity and the tooling that we were talking about on the banking side.
Yeah, Shri, look, one of the major changes that are constant, if I may say that, right, is regulations being updated on a quarterly to a half yearly basis, not just in locally in India, but globally. Especially after 2008, you've seen thousands of new regulations keep coming up and standards keep evolving as new technologies get built, new standards, as you mentioned, change. There's more implementation that comes in, and many a time we see both local, regional, as also global banks making many mistakes when it comes to regulatory implementation, leading to fines or delayed in implementation. And these are very, in most cases, very hard deadlines, right? Where they don't have a control over versus a internal upgrade, which you have a more control over, a product update, etc. When it comes to a regulatory upgrade, you don't really have a control over the deadlines. What are the mistakes that you seeing financial institutions make in that rush to get things done, and how can they solve that both collaboratively but also locally within their organization?
see it, okay. It has like dealing with grief, they say, no? There are 5 stages
Mhm.
of grief.
Yeah.
Something similar happens when a regulator announces a regulation, right? First thing people scramble to is to get the experts on their side, right? I mean, earlier days, I don't know how old you guys are, but I've heard budget speeches of Nani Palkiwala, right? So he was an eminent jurist and he used to dissect the budget extremely well. So you have budget experts, right? People, economic experts and things like that. Typically, what tends to happen is when a regulation is announced from a people rush to get these eminent people or the subject matter experts to understand that, right? And fortunately or unfortunately, even the regulators don't never or not always specify regulations in a very specific manner. They also tend to leave it open ended because they also know that technology obsolescence sets in, right? They would say that payment should happen faster. What do you mean by faster? Right? For me, it is 3 seconds. For my neighbor who takes life easy, it could be 10 minutes. Right? I mean, his logic is heavens won't fall if I get that money
Yeah.
after 10 minutes. I need it in 3 seconds. I'm standing in the storefront waiting for the money and payments to happen. Right? So, one is spend enough time doesn't spend in understanding the regulations in its entirety. Number one. Even if you do that, then when you transfer it into a technology enablement phase, right, you need to think through everything. From a QA point of view, you just don't test the happy paths. You need to do a lot of work around what we call as the edge cases.
Mm.
Right? Let's take a fintech. Right? Fintech will have an API for payments. Right? Now, there are two legs to it. One says that yes, this transaction is done. On the other end, the transaction might not get done. Right? My account is debited, but the e-commerce guy says, I'm not sending you the two goods because it's not come to me. So can you check what happens? Number one, can you check the retries? It says payment did not go. Do you want to retry? Can you check the retry that happens? Right? Those kind of things don't get tested thoroughly. Number one. Or you take that ISO 20022, multiple data elements. What happens if you miss one data element? What happens if you put in the wrong value in a data element? Reconciliation goes for a toss. But that simulation needs to be done. Now, especially when something is deadline oriented, there will be great temptation to take shortcuts. Okay, I mean, it's great temptation, and I, to a certain extent, understand where they come from. Because not every project which is regulatory will also start on time. End of the day, IT can start only when budget is approved. Somebody says, yes, go ahead, this is the money you have. They will spend a lot of time going back and forth. The poor chaps in IT would have presented 4 versions, 5 versions. The CFO would say, no, this is not that, that is not that. Finally, when everything gets cleared, these folks won't have enough time. Now, that is where that preparedness comes into play. So from a QA point of view, the least you can contribute to such a project is make them aware, these are the things that aren't working. What is working is fine, but what is more important is to tell that guy that these things are potential disasters. These are the areas where it could hit. So I know regulatory, you have to go live. These 10 things, please fix before you go live. The other things are slight optics. Some customer might get irritated, but you still have the next 2 weeks to fix it. Or go, all of you en masse, go back to the regulator and say, boss, you have been very ambiguous in this. We need some more time. Get me that 1 week extension or 2 week extension. But by and large, what tends to happen is that the edge cases, as we say, those kind of scenarios don't get simulated very well. They don't get envisaged at all in many cases. So a lot of things fall between cracks, especially if you have the external party involved, if you have 2 parties involved in the regulation, right? Where I have a e-commerce website also has to do something and the bank also has to do something.
Yeah.
Those are the most dangerous ones from a regulatory point of view. Because initially, once the regulation comes into force, you will find a lot of cases where any one leg fails.
Yeah.
Right? And that is where automation also comes into play. Right? And again, I'm coming back to the domain. You need only if you have a visualization of end-to-end how it happens, will you be able to get everything in and say, okay, this is how it needs to work end-to-end.
That's a fair comment. And sorry, Monica, just completing. I was going to say one of the cases that I like talking about when it comes to incomplete work, right, and no simulation, etc., is updating of code, which happens regularly, but especially if it's for live use cases. So, classic example is this company, which was Knight Capital. You may or may not have heard of them. About 10 years ago, they were updating their system, and the process involved updating the code on multiple servers. And they did that over a weekend when the markets were not open. When the market opened on a Monday, the algo basically went berserk and it was selling bids and buying offers, right? Basically, lot of money lost for the company, which went into tens of millions of dollars, and the market impact was also significant, where it hit the national market there in Europe. And the main thing when they diagnosed, they figured out was out of 7 servers or 8 servers, they had updated. The process involved cleaning the code completely, removing it, and then updating and adding the new code. So for 6 out of the 7, flawless, everything was done accordingly. In the 7th server, they left 1 line of code, and then it wasn't deleted fully because used manual, I guess, whatever happened, and then the old code interfered with the new code, and everything went berserk. And that should have been a test that should have been done before going live. They did not do it, thinking that everything is okay. And I guess that's a classic example of where it not only impacts you as a business, where you're losing a lot of money, but it also has a massive impact on your market as such as well. Yeah.
Not just test. See, it's more like having a proper checklist.
Yeah.
Not everything, QA can't address everything, right? So there'll be a lot of other activities when you go live, which you need to do from an environment related point of view or from a parameter configuration management point of view. What one finds is Yes, people are quite capable. People are involved in all go live. Okay, there is no way that anybody who's not up to the task will be a part of that team. They're all very, very capable. But things when they have gone wrong, what we have found is it is a lack of discipline. So it's like let's say you are a pilot. Now it doesn't matter how many flying hours you have under your belt, but every time you're in the cockpit, you're expected to go through a certain set of processes. Right? You have to physically approve or say that yes, this works, this works, this works, this works, this check, 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 everything working. This is the fuel gauge reading. This is what was there. Now that discipline doesn't necessarily happen everywhere. This is life and death situation because if any one thing is gone, also you don't, so therefore you don't take it for granted. The same discipline needs to come into when you're talking about go live and things. These are the checklists that we need to do. In fact, very interesting. I'm talking about in my earlier company when I was there. There was a project that was happening in Switzerland.
Okay.
And the team landed there for execution. They wanted everybody on site, and those days it was easy to send people to Europe, I guess. They landed and no environment was ready. So one waited for about 1 week. The entire team figured out Alps, everything, Geneva, Zurich, everything. They went happily, came back, and then started testing. So then we said, okay, we will come up with what we call as a day zero checklist. If my test execution has to start on day 7, on day 0, I will go with that checklist. It will have all the hardware, software, access requirements, everything. I will tick, and I created a minimum bar saying that only if this is there will I start execution, otherwise I will not start. Right? Like that, you need to have it at every stage. At every stage. Now, this is you're talking about is something big, very substantial. There are a lot of other things happen. For example, you have sometimes what happens is there are certain activities in terms of parameter updates. Before go live, only the users will do. They won't allow anybody else to do. Right? Now, when it goes live, it throws up a lot of problems. The regulatory parameters especially. But the process has to have where the user signs off saying that yes, has this process been done? It's been done. Quite a few places it is not there.
Yeah.
They figure it only after go live. So QA can do certain things, yes, but beyond that, there needs to be the discipline, a checklist, where people say, okay, this activity is supposed to be done and I have done it and I can confirm that no single line of code was left. I have cleaned it completely.
Sure. I think
So,
it's
Srini,
QA at the local level, right? Yeah. Go on, Monica.
Yeah.
I actually have a question given my product background. Srini, I'd love for you to double click almost on this. Like you mentioned, QA can only catch if there is significant discipline in the product development process. But when you are speaking to product leaders, people who are business function leaders, and you are trying to make them aware of not just the risk of not doing QA properly, but also doing it the right way, typically, what are some of the metrics that you think should be tracked in order for making QA not just successful, but making it the right function which catches errors on time? Like, what would those 3 or 4 things be that we should be watching out for?
The bare minimum 2 things I would say, one would be test coverage and 2 would be defect leakage. Okay. Test coverage is the preemption part of it. Okay. Now, how do you measure test coverage? I have to, then that is where the domain comes in. Now, typically what tends to happen, like I said earlier, requirements more often than not are implied. They have this implied bias, if one could use the term, right? Process A and B specified, C and D is implied. Now, unfortunately, that implied biases don't get translated to the technology team completely. So how do I remove those implied biases? So on day 1, when I come in, I need to be able to take a look at what the requirements are and map them to functionalities. Account opening is a functionality. Within account opening, minor account opening would be a subfunction. Senior citizen account could be another subfunction. NRI account could be a third subfunction. Now, for each of the special category, there are business rules to be validated. If it is an NRE account, then you take their whatever passport details, where have they been, what is their address overseas and things like that. If it is a minor account, you need the guardian details and all those things. So those are what we call as test conditions to be validated, right? But every requirement needs to be translated into a testable function. Now, how do you map? How do you trace? So when you create transactions or scenarios, as you call, you need to be able to say that if I execute this scenario, These are the functionalities that get tested. So the rationale for saying that, okay, this project I'm going to execute 538 scenarios. The question is, why not 537 or 539? Because these 538 scenarios, when against each of the scenarios, I map the functionality that gets tested, I am able to demonstrate that across 538, every functionality gets tested at least once. That is the first level validation, right? Number two is that these functions put together, do they account for the overall module itself? Because when you identify functionalities, it gives you a process flow kind of a thing. So you will start with account opening. But if it doesn't get into transactions like deposits, loan disbursement, and things like that, you will be able to figure out the gaps. Right? You will be able to figure out the gap saying that, yeah, there is loan origination is there, management is there, but where are you talking about collections?
Yeah.
Right. So what you do is, if you're going in with that kind of a domain strength, then first level of value add that you need to figure out to do is, how do I take that requirements document, which is at about 60-65% level of completeness? How do I take it to 92-93% level of completeness? So please note, I'm not talking 100%, because there will be reports which the finance department wants. They will have their own set of reports which may come in much later. But you can manage to deal with those things later when you have handle on the 90-93% things. But if your starting handle is going to be only 65%, then you're going to be dealing with a larger mess.
Absolutely.
Right? So once you have done that, then for each of the functions that you've identified, you can take them into sub-function. Like I told you, identify the condition. For a combination of sub-function and condition, you can create the cases, and therefore you have complete traceability. Right? That is one. Where the other thing which we do, like I told you recently, we got a parameter dump. Right? We identified the products and told the users, this is how your product is being configured and things like that. As a part of that, what we did, we identified events that the products would go through. The product's life cycle has events, right? Event 1, event 2, event 3. So for those group of products, we identified almost 1,880 events. And when we gave coverage or traceability evidence to them, it was not just your requirement, function, condition cases. That was one level. We also gave them a product event matrix coverage. So that becomes very important. Otherwise, it is like my idea of coverage and your idea of coverage. It will be very, very different. That needs to get standardized to say that you are implementing this particular application, and this particular application has these many functionalities. What it is meant to do is a single source of truth, that you cannot have multiple versions of what it is meant to do. So how early in the life cycle that you identify what it is meant to do and then go about creating your coverage, then the test coverage metrics becomes meaningful. And once you identified that, then you say that I have a process where no defect will go out. So that is where the defect leakage metrics becomes very important.
So I have a question, Srini. When we think about the scale that you deal with when across the spectrum in terms of maturity, whether it is banks, which are obviously very high on the spectrum of not just compliance, but in terms of complexity and multiple systems, versus fintechs that have to do it very fast, very quickly. And at the same time, I would think that sometimes there will be gray areas of compliance simply because they have to innovate and be able to create things faster and be more nimble. How do you deal with this complexity that is there, which is within the ecosystem, where fintechs work
Sorry,
with
come
banks,
again. I think I
banks work with
lost you in
fintechs,
between.
and at the,
Sorry, I think I
I
lost
was
you in between.
talking
Come again.
I was talking about like when you're dealing with the maturity level or almost spectrum, whether it is fintechs or whether it is banks or banks working with fintechs or fintechs working with banks, there's a very different maturity level all across. My question really is at this point in time, do you deal differently when you're dealing with, say, a fintech which is scaling versus a bank which already has thousands and millions of customers? How does effective QA as a practice and as a process change?
To a certain extent, yes. Not to a great extent, but to a certain extent, yes. Fintechs which are scaling have their own challenges, right? In terms of they are used to doing things in smaller teams, doing things faster, doing things ad hoc, right? And depends upon the level of preparatory work for scale. I'll give you a very small example. When you're small, you just started off your fintech. It is 3 screens, customer flowing, traffic, incoming, outgoing. Your focus is more on performance, not so much on functionality. You want to know whether I have, whether does it do 3,000 transactions concurrently, 2,000 transactions concurrently, and things like that. But from a QA point of view, they never get into this habit of saying that let me categorize critical functionality versus non-critical functionality. But when you scale the scope of your fintech, you come to releases where you don't have time. So you need to have the differentiation between critical and non-critical, because only then can you do risk-based testing. All right. So there are times when you walk into a scaling fintech and you say that there's a lot of mess, there'll be two teams. One which will clean up the mess, one which will parallelly put in the process in place and run with it. Right? And not just fintechs. I am talking about a fairly large payments organization. Greenfield payments organization, though, trying to launch a lot of things, and we walked in the middle of it when they had already started. Right. So it was first 4 months were extremely intense, because they are used to shouting at the other guy saying, get this done, get that done, this thing, and that guy coming back and saying that, yes, I have done this and things like that. There was no organized methodology there. And here we had to do two things. We had to be a part of that team, be a part of that, shouting message exchange, saying that, yes, I have done this, yes, I have doused this fire and things like that. And parallelly, another team quietly working on building the process. The challenge happens when is that once you build the process, then everybody has to adapt to it. They are used to working in a different way. And then when you have to adapt to a process, that becomes a problem until such time something bombs. Then they realize the cost of not adhering to the process, and then it settles. Whereas again, in a bank, when you talk about at scale, you have a different kind of problem. There are too many disparate elements involved or too many departments involved. Right? In a fintech, there'll be one person who will get everything done for you. Smaller company. Here, everything is very siloed. Right? I have to start testing where are the requirements. Oh, that ops guy will give it to you. Talk to him, he will give it to you. Fine, let us start environment. Oh, you talk to the infra guy. All right? So if it is a transformation project, that single point of contact becomes very, very important. And this single point of contact also needs to be empowered. If he or she is not empowered, it's a disaster. But the difference which you ask between the fintech and this thing is there are two different sets of problems. Not always. There are fintechs which acknowledge, or your smaller companies which acknowledge, saying that, listen, we are growing and you are here because we don't have the numbers. So they appreciate you getting into the mess in changing tires in a moving vehicle, so to speak. They appreciate all that effort. So to that extent, the level of cooperation could also be higher. They know that, when you try to change tires in a moving vehicle, sometimes some scratches, some dents will happen. So they will not look at that. They would say, firstly, you agreed to change tires in a moving vehicle. Great, you did that. But at the same time, you also parallelly created a fantastic pit crew. Now I don't have to worry. Everything is process. Right? So that happens. Those challenges do happen.
Shane, this has been really fascinating, right? And this is a lot of learning for me. I don't come from the product side of things, but understanding how the nuts and bolts, as it were, of this beautiful Formula One car that you're running as a pit crew in some senses. I wanted to kind of wrap this up with one key question, which is around a hot topic, which is AI, right? In general, you touched upon two things. And one was, and these are the kind of problems the AI panacea is supposed to solve, right? Which is, on one hand, you have the chaos of trying to run things almost in an agile way, and then you have the banking process, which is about siloed but yet needs to be connected. So we did begin, before we started the conversation, talking a little bit about AI and what your clients are looking at, but would love to hear one as two sub questions. One being, how do you see AI, the use of AI specifically? It doesn't have to be Gen AI, but AI reframing, resetting the QA in financial services? And second is, what are your thoughts on agentic AI broadly speaking, right, for taking over some of these roles and being implemented? Yeah.
Okay, so this morning I got a WhatsApp forward from one of my colleagues, which says, I'm just reading it out. JP Morgan calls out AI spend, says $650 billion in annual revenue required to deliver mere 10% on AI build out,
Yeah.
equivalent to $35 payment from every iPhone user or $180 from every Netflix subscriber in perpetuity. Okay, so there are two aspects to AI from what we have learned till now. One is capability, and that seems to be immense. Two is implementation feasibility. That is where a lot of gray areas exist, divergent views exist across the spectrum. Okay, so we have an AI team. Okay, just to let you know, we've been working on it for the last 1 year. So you have this open source model which does a lot of things. It can write your resumes, it can do all those things. And then you have the next set of models which use those models as a base set, that when you have a meeting, we will transcribe your notes, minutes of the meeting and everything, we can get it done and stuff like that. The third one is where the customized area comes from, customization area comes. That is where a lot of people need to look and figure out what can be done, right? The other aspects are AI is great, but identifying areas where you can use AI. Because one thing that I don't hear being talked about is the spend on computational infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right. I'll give a very, very small example. We've built a model now from a QA point of view, an automated or an AI-based test case generator, as they call it. Okay. And the first time when we did it, we want to process, we bought a server which was 35 lakhs. And it's one of those international brands, and the local region head wanted to know who's this buying a 35 lakh server. He came to the office. So we told him this is what we are doing and stuff. 4 months later, the server that is available in the marketplace, which allows you to process things like this, costs about 1.5 crores. So you say, okay, I'm not going to buy that because I don't know 4 months down the line whether that will be available or something else will come up. But cost of hiring that is about 14 lakhs a month. A GPU capability, right? So you might implement AI, but for you to get that thing implemented, what is the cost of implementation that you need to realize? So this morning we had an AI presentation to a client where we said the difference between two things. One processes it in 5 minutes, another processes it in 30 minutes. So you really need to take a step back and say that as a bank, do I need this 5-minute thing or am I okay with the 30-minute thing? Right? It's what is happening with your e-commerce, quick delivery e-commerce guys. Do I need that in 10 minutes in the first place? I can wait for an hour. Right? So that part of it is one area which people are, I think it's hitting home now. Because quite a few people have gone ahead and subscribed. They have taken subscriptions of OpenAI on Azure and things like that. And now the ROI discussions are happening. And for whatever little I'm able to gather, they are becoming extremely uncomfortable discussions. Right? Because not everybody is decisively being able to prove ROI.
Yeah.
Does it mean AI doesn't work? I think it's too early to call that. Right? Other area is there is a lot of FOMO among customers themselves. I mean, every customer wants to know what is it that you have in AI today. So that has led to a lot of people figuring out, how can I dress this cat as a dog? How can I take this, animal and make it look like a horse, kind of a thing. So you have this AI-enabled, AI-driven, AI-based kind of lot of presentations that are happening. How I will embed AI in your operations, kind of a thing, right? But the larger issue there is data. So I will give you an example of data. As I told you, we are trying to figure out a test case generator. Okay. Now, prior to that, the model has to first figure out what the domain is. Okay. So you first have to create a basic model, which cannot be one of your large learning models. Because if you take a large learning model to customer, again, the compute capability for them will be very high. So you have to customize on a smaller learning model or take a large learning model and create components in the SLM, right? And then you create the basic algo there, saying if I give you this input, this is how you would look at it and things like that. Then you start giving it the input. Now, I told you earlier, we are sitting with 161,000 test cases. We identified 18,000 test cases. I cannot just put in the test cases. I have to reverse engineer the requirements, saying my starting point will be a requirement document like this. For this requirement document, the business process maps would be like this. So I have to first establish the relationship between the business process and the requirements, right? Then with those requirements, I have to say, okay, this requirement will translate into this functionality. Then between the function and subfunction, I have to teach. The word is fine tune. You can't say teach. AI gets offended. So you have to establish the relationship between the function and the subfunction. And then say for this subfunction, there is something called a business rule that needs to get validated. So the entire, at a minutest nuanced level, you need to first fine tune the relationships between various elements. Now you've done all this, you address only the domain part. What about the application part? Now, where do I go for the application part? I'm not sitting with the application. People who are sitting with the application are not doing this, right? Yeah. So there are certain products which have their user manuals on the web with the screenshots. So we download those screenshots. Wherever applicable, we say, I had taught you about requirements, I had taught you business process map, and I have taught you functions. This is how it translates to screens. And within screens, again, I have to go through the process of fine-tuning the relationship between this field to this field to this field to this field. That is when it learns about the application. And this is one application. So you fine-tune it and fine-tune it. It will take you time, 8 or 9 months after having had all this data. But that data is a key thing which is missing all over the place. Like I told somebody, people have built fantastic university campuses. But you ask them, where is the curriculum? Nobody has it. Or not many people have it. Maybe somebody has it and I don't know. But not many people have that curriculum. It has everything, fantastic lecture halls, cafeteria, gym, there's a pool, there are water bodies, everything that you want you have. The lovely outdoor shaded areas where you can just lie down and read your books and things like that. But curriculum, not yet decided. How will you confer the degree on me? And if I've created so much of infrastructure, I'll create that also. Don't worry about it. That's how the whole thing is. So we actually were going through some level of stress 6-7 months ago. Because the way we knew it, we said, this is the journey we have to traverse. Only then you will get this. Because from a QA point of view, what can AI do? It should automatically generate test cases, automatically generate test data. Then you should have an automation tool which picks it up and automatically automates it and executes it. So it becomes seamless, right? Even after that, you will need people who know the domain to prompt it well. The data analyst has to be there. But instead of a 40-man QA team, you may require a 12-man, 13-man QA team. And far shorter period. And we thought maybe we are doing something wrong and the like, but we went through that process of stress. I don't know if you've seen that movie called Big Shot. On the 2008 crisis, have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. There's this character called Dr. Michael Blurry. Yeah. He figures out this problem in 2005 about this collateralized debt obligations not being of good quality. They are predominantly subprime. So he goes and he was the one who provokes the market to say that give me a swap on this, a credit default swap. Whereby if nobody defaults, I lose my money, an insurance premium on that basically, on all the bonds that they have sold. And he has to pay monthly insurance of about $2 million or $3 million or something like that, $90 million a year and things. Right? And if he had done that for 7 years, he would have lost all his fund. But he says, I know this has to happen in 2 to 4 years' time. I have that. So he goes through a certain level of stress at a point where the housing market is falling, but the rate on the swaps are not falling. They are at a premium. But they were artificially pegged there. So
Yeah.
he goes through a stress at that point of time saying that, have I done something wrong? So we went something similar, saying that, are we the bunch of idiots who have not figured it out? Whereas everybody and their uncles seem to have figured out on AI. Everybody's got something on AI and this thing, you know. But now it's that curve is coming. So to say the bell curve is kind of settling in. People are saying, yes, a lot of people are talking about it, but I don't have a full-fledged use case which makes sense. So we interestingly, this morning we had a presentation with a customer who really loved it because we said this is what we are doing on QA, but AI on its own is a capability. It's a capability on its own. We know the domain. Let us know if there is any operational area where we can contribute, and they were very thrilled with it. So it was a huge validation for us this morning, saying that okay, we've not been burning money unnecessarily, and we seem to be on the right track. But AI, a lot of people who are way ahead of the curve, a huge amount of people catching up. And I think some people are reconciled to die. Right. And in a part of that would be, yeah, this would be another fad. We will see 5 years down the line, we'll still be doing this, we'll still be coding. Because, see, notwithstanding all those, as a QA company, the kind of defects we see in the projects are still the same defects that we used to unearth in 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed. Right. I mean, you don't see any. Yes, the applications that they use, they are built on later technologies and they might process things faster and things like that. But from the defect point of view, we're still unearthing the same defects.
Good point. I mean, as we say, you still have the use of COBOL in banking, which is 80, 90 years old, right? And hiring
Insurance.
of these
A lot of life
older
insurance systems still are on COBOL.
yeah, and it's the lifeline of the financial services. They don't have enough developers on it. And talking
Yes.
about Michael Burry, right? It's ironic you speak about him now, given he just shut down his fund and essentially ended up on with the viral note on Twitter, breaking down the self-feeding um, AI bubble with multiple players and what he actually thinks of that, right? And calling them out. So it's just to be seen how much that blows up. Bashini, this has been really fascinating. I think there's a lot that, as I said, I've learned a lot on this, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to having you back again and talking more in detail
Sure.
about the whole world of QA. And I think this is quite exciting. This is it's a bit like, when there's a gold rush, go for investing in shovels, but a lot of people need to have a shovel because everyone has a backyard and you need things to do. And I think that's one key element of having that at all times and making sure it's suitable for all weathers, right? And that's where I see what Trisha is doing is fitting very well in not just in financial services but across the reality that we live in a digital world. So yeah.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Syed. Thank you, Monica. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Bye.
Audience keeps tuned for more interesting conversation with CEOs and people who are making innovation better for us and also bringing in newer concepts as we drive on a world that is completely digital, online, and encompassing all of our lives. Click like, follow us, and subscribe.